Hi, welcome to the Inclusive Storytelling Podcast. I'm your host, Ashwini Prasad, and if you are interested in bringing more belonging and inclusion to the entertainment industry, feel free to connect with me and let's talk. I'm at theinclusivescreenwriter.com, and you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at The Inclusive Screenwriter. Thanks so much for listening. A content warning. This episode talks about genocide and execution, so please listen accordingly. On December 26, 1862, the United States had the largest mass execution in its history. At 10 a.m., 38 Dakota or Santee Sioux prisoners were led to their deaths. The reason is, as the History Channel notes, is that more than 300 Santee Sioux were found guilty of raping and murdering Anglo settlers and were sentenced to hang. Out of the 300, 39 were given death sentences, and one received a last-minute reprieve from President Lincoln. The reason for this mass execution was that the Santee Sioux were found guilty of joining the so-called Minnesota Uprising, which was part of a larger, wider Indian wars that were occurring in what is called the West of the United States. And the reason is, for almost 50 years, Anglo settlers were actually invading the Santee Sioux, and these folks, First Nation folks, were forced to relocate to smaller reservations along the Minnesota River. In these reservations, they were badly mistreated to the brink of starvation, and no help was provided, and the Santee's pleas were ignored. Outraged, as you can imagine, the Santee Sioux struck back, and they killed Anglo settlers and took women as hostages. On September 23, 1862, under the leadership of General Henry H. Sibley, the Santee warriors were defeated, and the First Nations groups had to surrender. The trial and the subsequent hangings pay little attention to all the injustices that the Santee Sioux put up with and had to suffer through for so many decades. And it is said that the commutation of so many of the sentences really lends to President Lincoln and others really being able to understand why the Santee Sioux did what they did and their long-rooted suffering based in the Anglo settler abuse. The White Rose was a non-violent intellectual resistance group in Nazi Germany. It was led by 5 students and 1 professor at the University of Munich. Their names were Willy Graf, Kurt Huber, Christoph Probst, Alexander Schmorl, Hans Scholl, and Sophie Scholl. Hans, Alexander, Christoph, and Willy were medical students, and their studies were interrupted, most likely regularly, because of their compulsory service as student soldiers in the medical corps on the Eastern Front. And their experience was horrendous and had major impact in their thinking, and it motivated their resistance. So the group, the White Rose, led an anonymous leaflet and graffiti campaign. It called for active opposition to the Nazi regime. Their activities started in Munich on June 27, 1942, and the core group was arrested by the Gestapo on 18th of February 1943. Now, Hans, Sophie, and Christoph were executed by guillotine 4 days after their arrest, and the defendants were not given an opportunity to speak during their trial. It is told that Sophie interrupted the judge multiple times, even though she was not provided the opportunity to speak. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to like, subscribe, download, and leave a review. And be sure to connect with me at The Inclusive Screenwriter.